which is a large coalition of small traditional fishers. So he's been advising that group. There's a very important initiative, global initiative called Friends of the Earth, and in the past decade there's also been an India chapter of Friends of the Earth. So he's also part of the executive committee of Friends of the Earth, so on and so forth. वैसे बहुत सारे organizations हैं जिनके साथ सौम्या जी has been associated, and since its founding time भारत जत्ता का भी हिस्सा रहे हैं. So basically, of course, we have a whole lot of scientists and environmentalists, but to connect questions of environmental, ecological issues with social justice, to approach it from a working class perspective, to look at science from people's experiences, not just as a technical aspect, but to look at it as a people's issue, is I think one important dimension that Soumya ji brings into this whole discourse. And since last year, it's almost 1.5 years now, we've within the NAPM process also initiated, there have been different initiatives. One of it is the National Alliance for Climate and Ecological Justice. So broadly, we have a banner over there. If you can see, it kind of briefly describes what NASAG is. I'll just read it out very briefly. NASAG is an important initiative of NAPM to address climate crisis through an ecological and social justice approach, connecting, upholding human rights and the coexistence of all species. It's a pan-Indian forum comprising grassroots movement activists, ecologists, climate scientists, environmental researchers, lawyers and students. So nationally, of course, various states, in different states, NASAG is trying to engage with different people's struggles, and we've all, in fact, many of us who've been part of movements have, whether it is struggles around Jal Jangal Zameen, communities, oppressed communities, Adivasi, Dalits, other communities fighting to protect their rights, agrarian communities, or even in the urban context, workers groups have all the time, I mean many times we might not necessarily couch it in the language of climate justice, but these questions have been raised in different ways for a long period of time. But now, as we also see, and I think Soumya ji will dwell on that in detail about how, what he usually refers to as legacy issues, but there are a whole range of other issues, and in terms of impacts also, of course, we are right now the immediate context maybe that many of us would connect with is the Ladakh struggle, where 4 people have been brutally killed, and there's been so much of repression on that movement for raising very legitimate questions of protecting their Himalayan region, their high cold desert, and asking for 6th schedule and statehood. So it's not just a political demand, it is also an ecological justice demand, right? Likewise, there are so many struggles across the country, some that are more famous or known, many struggles that are not known. ఇక్కడ మన తెలంగాణలోనే చూస్తే ఎన్నో పోరాటాలు ఉన్నాయి, ఇంక్లూడింగ్ ఫార్మాసిటీకి వ్యతిరేకంగా, ethanol plants వ్యతిరేకంగా రకరకాల పోరాటాలు ఉన్నాయి. There are lots of struggles in Telangana also that keep happening. Some in the urban context, for instance, the Kancha Gachibowli was a more recent example. Many in the rural context, many in the Adivasi context. And then there's the whole larger question of how climate, the deepening climate crisis is actually affecting a large section of working class, whether it is outdoor workers, construction workers, sanitation workers, hamal workers, gig and platform workers, so on and so forth. There have been certain initiatives in terms of coming up with climate action plans and stuff like that, but I think it's really important to look at these things in much more detail, and within all of this, one is to look at the problem landscape. I think a lot of us look at small components of it. The landscape is also huge, and within that, what is it that we can do as citizens or people's organizations? Of course, different people are engaged and plugged into it in different ways, but there's still a lot more that we can do. I'll just say this one small thing and hand over to Soumya ji, which is many times climate crisis, maybe rightly so, is also projected as yes, it is a huge, scary problem. But it's also true that we can't go to that level of hopelessness that we give up or not. Like even yesterday, Bhanu and I, we were having a conversation and we thought many times being hopeless is also a privilege. It is not a privilege that the oppressed communities and working people have. They have to every day stand up and go on with their lives and livelihoods and struggle. So I think for many of us, especially located in an urban context, there are still a lot of things that we can do, we can be part of. Not necessarily everything might have an immediate substantive change, but we can be part of the larger circle of change, and it is with that hope also maybe we should as citizens approach the climate question as well, and what are the kinds of things that we can do, especially in a state like Telangana. We are even right now being faced with this issue about Musi river redevelopment. I mean, on the one hand, there is so much of pollution that is pharma-related pollution that is happening. Then there are projects like Lamakaan that are being planned. But then, evicting urban communities or poor people who are living on the banks of Musi is seen as the first measure to actually do so-called quote-unquote river cleaning and then make it a riverfront. So, I mean, across India there are more than 100 plus riverfront projects. In many cities there are very strong movements also going on, and also questioning the whole politics of how rivers have to be governed or managed in the name of riverfronts. What is it that is really happening? It is real estate fronts, not riverfronts. So there's a lot of rethinking also of the so-called development model that needs to happen. But this is just one example. There are so many issues that are part of the climate landscape. So I will, this is the larger context, but what are the things that we can also do in Telangana? That will be one focus area of Soumya ji. He'll also talk about, I think sometimes there are certain myths about understanding the whole climate justice question as well. I think it's also important to bust some of those things to have a basic understanding, and then what is it that we as citizens can do. Yeah.
Thank you, Mira. And good evening, namaskar to everyone. What I'll try to do, I'll try to talk about what we call the climate crisis, and why we call it a climate crisis, not a climate change. Climate change is a process of change which can be managed, which part natural. All of these are arguments have been advocated over the time, over the decades. And since I have been also working not only with groups like this, but also with the international community like the UNFCCC, their technical bodies, and also many international movements like the Climate Justice Now movement, Demand Climate Justice, War on One. So there is a larger perspective, and once you start looking at the whole issue through the lens of those communities, I'll explain that it becomes a crisis for them. It's not a crisis for middle upper middle class people who have a lot of options of switching on the AC when both the temperature and humidity goes up, who do not lose their livelihood for a large number of days. But it is a crisis often of existence and having food or not having food, having basic minimum to pay for their children's education or not having that. So that has already happened and it is not in the future. So that's the perspective why we call it a climate crisis. But since this thing, and today we also, in the morning we went to several slum areas affected by Musi floods. I also saw that, and I come across similar communities. Like just before coming here I was in Chennai, and in North Chennai I was, after 2 days of intensive training workshop for Tamil Nadu activists, I was also taken for a quote-unquote toxic tour, how North Chennai has become the toxic dump yard for development, and it is being compounded with climate impact. So basically I'll try to, let me, because this is a little uneven. Basically what I'll try to say, why this crisis is something very different in nature. And yesterday's meeting at the end, I tried to highlight that, but this is another forum. So I'll try to highlight first why many of the scientists who are working very deeply with multiple Earth systems, and the climate system is only one chain. There are 9 Earth systems globally which drive a lot of processes on the Earth, which are connected with climate, which are connected with the biological world, which are connected with the what you feel, what kind of weather. All of these are there, including what we call novel materials, including plastics. Novel materials is material which human beings have introduced, which was not there in nature, or there in nature in very, very insignificant matter. amount. So all of these are different earth systems. Why the climate crisis is very different is that from what I call legacy environmental issues. Like you have heard about the Narmada Bachao Andolan. So that is basically against mega dams which were being built and have been built on Narmada River. Similarly in Tehri Dam, and there were a lot of people displaced, lot of villages and one major town submerged, forests submerged. Same thing happened in many other projects. Similar thing when we worked in the coastal Gujarat in Mundra against Tata Mundra and Adani Mundra, two mega coal power plants, we found a whole lot of severe impacts which have devastated the livelihoods of small scale fish workers, artisanal fish workers. The small scale salt panners who have 2 acres of land in Gujarat, this Kutch, and they make small scale, in a very small scale they make salt. The family works. Similarly with the pastoralists, which are called Maldharis. But these are all issues where, supposing you have a better governance or a better sense by some group, and you remove that reason, like in Europe, in US, not because of their greatness, but because of some other reasons, lot of existing dams have been dismantled over the last 1.5 decades. And it has been seen, and this has also happened in India in very small scale. If you remove such a project which caused some environmental damages, within a period of 12 to 13 to 15 years, the entire ecology regenerates. It comes back to almost the previous state when that massive destructive influence was not there. And this has been the experience with most other damaging industrial pollution, except in one case, that's nuclear power. Because the nuclear power issue, the spent fuel and the highly radioactive, long-term radioactive materials are not taken care of in anything less than tens of thousands of years. So if you leave that apart, most other environmentally damaging projects or interventions, in case you are able to stop that, within 12 to 15 years, ecology will restore. But unlike that, the climate crisis, because of the massive inertia and that interconnectedness of the 9 earth systems, there is a very long-term trend. It's a much slower trend, but it's a very long-term trend. And that is being shown. I'm saying it's a very slow trend, but till now, what we have seen, the global scientific assessment, which most of you know, IPCC, even the 6th assessment report, from the 3rd assessment report, it has consistently been shown that what the IPCC has projected, that by 2050, these systems will change this much. By 2070, there will be this much change. The actual change on the ground has consistently been much higher than that. There are some reasons for that. I probably just mention, and if there is interest I can explain, but I will not go into deeper. What are the feedback mechanisms? What are the positive or amplifying feedback mechanisms? How the system, the cause and effect, they amplify themselves, sometimes without waiting for another bad influence or intervention. So I'll try to explain that in a very brief manner. But because the trend is over a very long period, the present amount of driving forces, and what are the drivers of climate change? As I said, I know, as I said yesterday also, and as Meera explained, the legacy pollution issues or environmental damage issues are important. They have been important and they will remain important, and they will remain important to be addressed. But they have a very different character from what we are now facing. The second difference is, if there is like the Kacha Gachibowli case, what is causing the damage you can immediately see. You can see. Most people are not able to see what is causing the climate crisis. And I'll explain why I am calling it a crisis again and again, because for many of you, maybe in a conceptual manner you might accept, but unless you have seen those, it's not very clear. Let me give some example and then come back to the science a little bit, and then I will go into what are the majorly increasing impacts for this region of India and what can be strategies. I don't know what people will do, but what could be the strategies, what should be the strategies. If you look at Telangana no longer has a coastline. Earlier integrated unified Andhra had a coastline. Telangana no longer has coastline, but just for a moment, you know that there are 3 seas that cover India. Bay of Bengal in the east, Arabian Sea in the west, little part of Indian Ocean on the south. Traditionally, the Bay of Bengal was cyclone prone. The 115 years of history, meteorological history that we have for the cyclones shows that very clearly. The Arabian Sea was not very prone to cyclones. What has happened over the last 17 years, just over 17 years, is that it's okay, you can hear, no? Because there's a mic here. So over the last 17 years, the number of cyclones over the Arabian Sea has increased 100%, 100%, doubled, which has not happened in any other sea in any other part of the world. And how it has, why is it important for us to consider? India has around 2 crore or little more small scale coastal fish workers, which are basically artisanal fish workers. They take out a small engine powered boat, go out within the territorial waters, 12 nautical mile is the territorial water, and catch fish. There are 2-3 things that has happened. One, uniformly, not exactly uniformly, but all across, the sea surface temperatures have gone up. Part of global warming, the land has warmed up faster, the seas has warmed up a little slower. But the sea also has warmed up by little more than 1 degree Celsius. And as a result, excuse me. So, as a part of that, the temperature, because the temperatures have increased, and you might know that the fish are one of the most sensitive to 3 things. One is the temperature, second is the pH, third is the dissolved oxygen in the water. And if any one of these changes a little bit, like by 1 degree temperature, by 20% the pH changes, then the fish that are accustomed to live in that cannot live there. Either it dies out or it has to migrate out in search of better places. In places like Kerala coast, oil sardine, which is a very good fish in terms of economic value, has largely migrated out north. That's a very simple connection. Temperatures have increased. Over the last 120 years, the sea's pH value has decreased by 40%. That means the sea water has become acidic, more acidic by 40%. So if you are an animal who is living in water and I pour a lot of acid into it, it's not very comfortable for that animal. So large scale impacts are happening. The increased carbon dioxide, which is, everybody knows that we talk about global warming as greenhouse gas, what we call the hidden impact of or hidden climate change is happening in the sea. Because the carbon dioxide is not only building up in the air, because the ocean and the atmosphere continuously interacts through waves and wind, the carbon dioxide is getting dissolved in the seawater, and that's exactly why it has become more acidic, by becoming the carbon dioxide becoming carbonic acid. So these 3 impacts, one is the temperature rise, second is the more acidic water, and third, as the water warmed up, it has less capacity to dissolve oxygen. Like if you make tea, you'll see bubbles coming up. And that's the dissolved air. The same thing is happening in the sea all across. So these three together has made the waters of particularly coastal oceans and the first 700 meters of the oceans from the surface up to 700 meter depth. Very, very unlike what the fish and other animals and other life were used to. So many of these are either died out or migrated to better places. And but the problem is a group of fish workers, supposing from Kerala or from Karnataka coast, they are not free to migrate to Gujarat to get better fish. They will be beaten by the people who are there. You know what is happening between India and Pakistan, India and Sri Lanka. Fish workers are regularly caught, beaten, shot by navies of each other's countries. So this has increased tremendously because the fishing grounds have been tremendously impacted. So that's just one, I'll not go into details of that. But what are the largest number of people who inhabit India as a kind of similarity? Any idea? Office workers, farmers, or who? It's not only migrant but informal sector workers, which migrant workers form a part, but and for large part, informal sector workers. And this informalization of Indian economy over the last 20-25 years, informalization of the economy. Formal jobs have got reduced drastically, outsourcing, smaller groups, informal sectors in everything. Even the shops and all are going down and they are becoming gig workers, and these are tremendously increased. So informal sector workers as a group, there are multiple types, even rickshaw pullers, street vendors, fish workers, Manrega workers, porters, or many others, construction workers, gig workers. This roughly constitutes today 45 to 50 crore people today in India. 45 to 50 crores, rough estimate. The government do not keep exact estimate. And out of that, a fairly large part are migrant workers. But the problem is, what are the impacts on these informal sector workers? I have not found too much of space in any policies regarding either climate crisis or any other ecological issue. Let me highlight 2-3 different things. 3-4 different things, because when we talk about floods, when we talk about impact on agriculture, generally the image of village, even floods, traditionally where floods used to come. If I talk about floods, Assam, Bihar, all of these areas will come in your mind. This decades and decades of information. Because of these mushy floods, recently which happened, which is a combination of either mismanagement or mischievous design and climate change impact. What happened in the Himalayas this year, in 2025, which happened in 2023 also, you must have seen the series of disasters in the Himalayas. This is again a combination. What happened is the intense rainfall events. I will explain why this has happened. Why it has happened in Telangana, the same reason it has happened in Ladakh, the same reason happens in all over the Himalayas, in China, in Southeast Asia, and in Central Europe. Everywhere is the same cause. As the temperatures have risen, and if you look at the actual record, the global average sea surface temperature over 23 and 24, 2023-24, broke all records, and these are called, scientists are calling them off the charts. It's not only broke records by a small margin, but they broke records by a very large margin. If you see the graphs, all till 2022, it was like close by. 23 went like this, 24 went like this. Seasonally they vary, but it went off the charts. And if you have 71% of the Earth's area covered by water, and all that water has suddenly means over the years, got a huge amount of extra heat. They are pumping huge amount of moisture in the air. So that's reason number one. why all across you are finding massive rainfalls. The reason number 2 is every 1 degree Celsius rise in the air temperature, the air can hold 7% more moisture. And the global climate records, you know, the temperature that IMD, the India Meteorological Department, or any other global climate or weather record, they report what is that called? It's called 2-meter air temperature. So globally, the weather stations measure the temperature 2 meters above the ground, not above a paved ground, normal ground, in a box. So it's 2-meter air temperature. So every 1 degree rise, the air can hold 7% more moisture. The oceans are pumping huge amount of moisture. Over the last several years, if you have noticed temperatures, 3 to 4 degree higher air temperatures than the last 30 years average, 3 decades average, which is called the average of present times. So that means the air can hold or is holding around say 20 to 28% more moisture. And moisture, more and more moisture is being pumped by the oceans. And as it rises, it expands and cools. And that means when it cools, its dew point and everything goes down. It cannot hold that much water. When it is at the surface, it is holding, because it is hot, it is holding huge amount of water. As soon as it rises, it loses that capacity to hold that extra water. So that has to come down as extremely heavy downpours. There is no other way. The air cannot hold it as it cools. So these two reasons together has increased intense rainfall incident across the world. Whether you look at US, look at Philippines, look at China, look at India, look at Europe, look at Arab countries. Saudi Arabia got flooded, 2 people died in the streets because they caught in floods in their cars. Dubai got flooded. So these are happening beyond all kinds of our traditional experiences. Last 4 or 5 years, it's happening all across the world. Before that, it was happening at much lower frequency. The rate of increase has gone beyond what the IPCC or any other agency has projected. And there is a reason for that. IPCC's very process is very conservative. They have to go through at least 5,000 to 6,000 papers, peer-reviewed journal. They have to process that documentation, and they have to arrive at 95% certainty. Beyond that, if it is 90%, they cannot say this will happen. But it might, if there is a 90% chance, there is a very high chance it might happen. But IPCC will not say it will happen. That's the process. It's not by mal-design. So these 3 factors have caused a massive amount of increase in intense rainfall. In India, over India, the IMD has a 110-year monsoon study that showed that the total rainfall during the 4 months of the monsoon, June to September, has increased marginally. There are regional differences. But the number of rainfall days has gone down, and that means when it rains, it pours bucketful. This almost like a cloud burst. Why the cloud burst incidence in the Himalayas is increased? In the Himalayas or in mountains, there is an additional effect called orographic lift. When the air is moisture laden and it's coming, as soon as it hits the mountain slope, there is a wind, air even behind that, the wind is pushing it, it quickly goes up. And it goes towards the top, it quickly expands because it is cool. So it opens up. So the cloud burst incident in the mountain regions have increased tremendously. And this year there is a record. This year, normally I was in Ladakh in September. Ladakh gets around 4.9 millimeter of rainfall average in August. It's called cold desert. This August, it got 49 mm. It's little more than 10 times the average rainfall.
And its soil cannot absorb the water.
And the soil in western Himalaya, entire western, not Ladakh only, has very little adhesion because this has got very little biological matter. It's great small pebbles, little bit of soil, sandy soil. It's not clayey soil. is very loose. If you have been to Ladakh, some of you might have been to Ladakh, you might have seen old forts built by kacha it, unbaked bricks. Because for the last 3,500 years, whole Western Himalaya have been getting very little rain because of a certain kind of climate. And that has suddenly changed within a very short span. So traditional houses, traditional ways of making houses has become dangerous. Because you cannot make mud brick houses anymore in Ladakh. But that was the tradition for the last 3,500 years. Let me also ask you a question, because I'll explain further. Do you know, or immediately something comes to your mind, that because of climate change, there was a civilizational collapse?
Yes.
Right. In fact, we have our closest example. There are two examples in not too old, within the last 5,000 years. But the best known example is our Harappan civilization. Harappan civilization, now we have enough evidence from lake bed deposit, from sea surface deposit, from tree rings, that around 4,200 years ago, the monsoon started shifting east. And that was because of a global cooling, which is part of the natural climate change cycle, which is roughly 100,000 years. One cycle is 100,000 years, is driven by the three Milankovitch cycles. So that natural cycle started. Just before that, the Sahara, from a green savanna, it started becoming desert. Our monsoon started shifting. It stopped going as far west and it started shifting, that means east. It stopped more east. Indus, Ghaggar Hakra, the 3-4 river system on which the Harappan civilization built up, they started drying up. So the civilization didn't have the food surplus that is needed for a civilized urban civilization to exist. So they abandoned the cities, moved east and south. And that's the period when the Harappans moved south and east. So we have a very clear example that without a massive extreme events and all, climate change can actually cause civilization collapse. And I'm connecting this with, there are a few very clear connections for today. You might have heard about not only the IPCC report, have any one of you heard about the IPBES report, the global study? It's another intergovernmental panel, IPBES, Intergovernmental Panel on Biological Diversity and Ecosystem Services. So it was released in 2018 and it was a global study, and that showed roughly 1 million species, 10 lakh species are facing extinction in the next 4 to 5 decades, and a very large part of them are insects. तो कीड़े मकोड़े मरने से हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है? Unfortunately, the primary pollinators of almost all our fruits and vegetables are insects. So if they die out, it's not only the species extinction, it's the abundance of the species. One species might not totally get extinct, but if there are 10 trillion of them, and now we have only 1 billion, then there is a major crisis of pollinating your crops and your food system, your entire food security. So that's one major area that is emerging very fast. And if you have noticed news all across, I'll come down to the areas in peninsular India where we are. But if you looked at news over the last 5-6 years, you see a lot of bee colony collapse, insect colony collapse being reported from multiple countries. And this is not unconnected. Like globally, the intensification of cyclones or hurricanes or typhoons, same thing, called by different names in different regions. The sudden intensification of some tropical storm, all tropical storms start over oceans. And the reason is, like you drive your either car or bike or scooter or something, the fuel is either petrol or diesel. So what is the fuel for storms? What is that fuel for storms? It's moisture. The more moisture you have, the more powerful the storm will be. Because when the water evaporates, it absorbs a huge amount of heat in the form of latent heat to evaporate. And that heat is there in the vapor, in the gas form. So when it rises and becomes water again, it releases that heat. It has to release that heat. That's simple physics. So if you release that massive amount of heat with that extra moisture, what happens to the air? It bursts out like a bomb. Like you have that Diwali bombs or other bombs. It just adds energy to the air. So all the storms all across the world have become stronger, and for wind speeds, if you increase the wind speed by double, the energy content of that destructive wind increases by 8 times. It's to the cube of the speed. So globally, storms, particularly tropical storms, cyclone, typhoon, hurricanes, all are generated over seas and oceans, and their power, destructive power, has increased tremendously, and it will go on and on. What we now know, given the Earth system trends, for the next 70, 80, 90 years, we have no respite for them, at least for this many years, because the Earth systems has gone into a trend. So even if we now convert many of our things to zero, even if we now stop driving cars, stop doing, which we are not doing, we are still increasing everything. But even if we do now, it will take at least 50, 60 years for this to flatten out. It's on an increasing graph. Like it took almost 200 years to increase. Similar. So, and our preparation to respond to this is very, very low. Very low. Though we have some plans here and there. Now let me quickly come back to peninsular India. Peninsular India, and this is not only me saying, it's not only IPCC's report, because you know IPCC is the globally most respected, accepted body of scientific knowledge on climate change science. IPCC's reports are a little macro level. It's not very granular for each region or each smaller region. It do not talk about districts or talukas. But in the year 2020, I don't know how many of you have seen this, the Ministry of Earth Science, Government of India, did a very detailed study. And this study was released in June 2020 by then Minister of Environment, Mr. Hyderabad. And this is called the Assessment of Climate Change over the Indian region. It's a detailed study, granular study over Indian region. And that also is showing two of the fastest rising impacts of climate, quote unquote, change is one is heat wave. I'll go and explain why heat wave is a bad description. It's incomplete description. One is heat wave. Second is intense rainfall and flooding. And third is big storms. So these are being projected as the fastest rising impacts by the Government of India themselves. By their top scientific body, this study was mostly done by IITM, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. But some others also joined in. It was under the Ministry of Earth Science. So if you have heat impact as one of the fastest rising impacts of climate change, then it is expected that all government bodies, all others understand the impacts, where it is increasing, what kind of impacts, and what to do. Unfortunately, there are multiple problems in this. Because if you have seen the IMD, the Indian Meteorological Department regular forecast or their information, they talk about the temperature. When they talk about, you know what is a heat wave probably? That there is a very clear, you know what is a heat wave? Anyone?
High temperature,
But how much high temperature, how long?
extended periods of high temperature and wind.
IMD has three very clear definitions. They define India or demarcate India in three regions. One is the plains, where this is part of the plains. Second is the coastal areas. Third is the hills. Hills means the Himalayas, lower Himalayas, those kind of areas. In the plains, the temperature has to be a minimum of 40 degrees Celsius. In the coastal areas, 37 degrees Celsius minimum. And in the hills, 30 degrees. But that's not enough. It has to be 4.5 degrees Celsius higher than the average maximum of that place on that day. And that's also not enough. This condition has to prevail for 2 days, 48 hours in that weather station's area. Only then IMD will declare a heatwave condition prevails in this area. Now see the problem in this whole definition. One, all of you must have heard about urban heat island effect. Urban heat island effect. Every city except some very small towns which are very green like that, or coastal area completely on the coast, 99% of cities and towns have a lot of big buildings, blacktop roads, concrete paving, so they absorb lot more solar heat, sun's energy, and retain it in the concrete walls, glass, steel, everything. So that heat is not, there is not enough space to radiate it out because it's confined. So urban areas are generally, this kind of urban built up areas, 4 to 6 degrees Celsius warmer than just that outside when it is not so densely populated. So that means there is an island of heat which is extra temperature. So this is called urban heat island effect. And where do the construction workers, the rickshaw pullers, the street vendors, the porters, like we said Hamali or Hamat workers or something, the gig workers, where do they work? They don't work where the weather station is. They work on the street. They work on the mandi. They work on construction site which is exposed to the sun also. So they are exposed not to the temperature and condition which the IMD weather station is giving. I don't know how many weather stations Hyderabad has. There are only 5 we found out yesterday. 5 or 6 weather stations. And most you will be noticing, if you just look at into data, where are the weather stations in Hyderabad, the IMD station. You will find most of them are in well shaded areas. Like the primary weather station in Delhi is in Safdarjung Airport. It's a disused airport, 700 acres of greenery. The other station is Indira Palace, that's the Ministry of Environment head office, which is next to Jorba Gardens. So the weather report, the temperature, humidity, everything report that station is giving is way out of the range of what the workers themselves are facing. And workers' health impacts or their other livelihood impacts, I will come to that, is not determined by what temperature is there in the weather station. It is determined what I am facing here, right here, where I am working. And that is not reported by IMD. Today the IMD is not equipped, not geared to report that. So there is a huge gap. Though we are very happy, okay, IMD can give heat wave warning. But the heat wave warning they are giving is completely inadequate for very large part of informal sector workers. And people are dying. Actually people are dying. I am working with the National Hawkers Federation. I have been working with the National Federation for Small Scale Fish Workers and some construction workers union in North. People have died in large numbers. Nobody told them that the condition is risky. That's two major drawbacks. The third drawback, IMD, have you ever heard IMD is giving you an warning for heat index? Have you ever seen any warning that heat index, the heat index is high? No. They are just now experimenting. Probably we have interacted with them for long, years and years. Now they are thinking of introducing this. What is the heat index? If you have a high temperature, air temperature, that's not as damaging to your health as if the temperature is higher. Also the relative humidity, the amount of moisture is there in the air, because the primary mechanism of the body to cool down is by perspiration. So if you have a high temperature of 42 degrees or 43 degrees, like we have in Delhi regularly in the summer, and I have walked kilometers in that condition. In Rajasthan, people still walk physically on 43, 44 because the humidity is very low. So your body, if you drink some water, your body can sweat and cool it down. But what happens in coastal areas or in areas where the moisture buildup is also high? Like I said, within the urban heat island, it's not only the temperature which builds up, because there are so many other activities. The cars are running, every car, every bus, everything is, apart from the carbon dioxide and sulfur, they are also emitting vapor. Vapor, because the hydrocarbon, one is hydrogen. So if you burn petrol or diesel, water vapor is also a product, out product, is end product. Lot of other industries are happening, lot of water usage happen in the urban areas. So both the temperature rises and the humidity builds up. And unless a city is designed to have a very good ventilation, very straight lanes or roads where the breeze can take away, very few cities are designed like that. Like I don't know if any of you have gone to Manhattan, New York Central, Manhattan Island, any avenue or street you stand, strong wind pushes you. It's like grid. Very few cities are designed like that. So both heat and humidity builds up. And that means workers are working in conditions which are almost in the death zone. And you know, just anyone can tell me which temperature, what is the minimum temperature that if you are doing unprotected physical work, that means you are doing some physical work but not cooled, where you can die. What is that minimum temperature?
44.
Anyone else? Anyway, just random try.
42 to 44.
34.
34.
If the humidity is 90%, and if you are working in a temperature of 34 degrees Celsius without cooling, you are doing physical work, you can die. And that's medical science. Just look at, not right now maybe, but if you want you can do. Just start heat index warming chart or heat index chart. You'll see a red zone where if you are working without cooling at a temperature of 34 degree and 90% relative humidity, there is a possibility you can also die. Not everybody will die. Depends on how tough you are, what is your resilience, all of this. But those with a little bit of heart problem, little bit of kidney problem, they are the first ones to be impacted. So,
model humidity will be around 75 to 80%.
no, there is no model humidity.
For example, in the Deccan Plateau and all.
In the monsoon season, 75-80 you get for 2-3 months. So when the temperature goes beyond in 75-80, say 37-8, you are entering the red zone.
Not about 40. You have people-
Not even 40. You can see the heat wave heat index chart. It's public domain. It's global. It's not made by me or anyone like Mira or Message Forum. It's global, and it's approved by medical science. So in this condition, what is our governance system doing? Because both the Indian government Ministry of Arts Science report as well as ITCC have long marked out the Gangetic Basin and the Peninsular India. The condition of high heat, high temperature and humidity are the fastest rising. So your part, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, all of these are in that part where heat index is rising very fast. And crores of workers, informal sector as well as formal sectors, people have died in factories because of heat index. Because a lot of factories have water use also and temperature. A lot of industrial processes generate, most industrial processes generate a lot of heat. So this is a condition which is explosive for workers who do not have proper cooling facility. And tell me how many workers that you know get cooling while they are working. And how many have you seen as a percentage that you can think of? Minuscule. Even in formal factories. In fact, a month ago, just about a month ago, Medadai called and asking me, बताइए फैक्ट्री में हम कुछ काम कर रहे हैं, इनको कितना होना चाहिए, क्या रूल है? So even in factories, they are not giving that. So think of construction workers, street vendors, fish workers, porters, rickshaw pullers, gig workers. What are they getting? And this number of deaths are not recorded properly by government design. They will record it as heart failure, they will record it as kidney failure, because heart and kidney are the first to fail during this high heat index condition. So this is one major area that has increased dramatically and keep on increasing by all reports, all projections for at least the next 50, 60, 70 years. Not a very happy situation, but are we doing enough? And let me tell you, can you tell me which is the ministry that holds the, in India, the legislative framework for responding to this kind of disasters? Most of you will know. What is the law that deals with this kind of things? The National Disaster Management Act 2005. National Disaster Management Act 2005, and it's the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the custodian ministry of that law. The Ministry of Earth Science as well as IPCC, so both internationally and nationally, have clearly said through their studies that heat waves and heat index are one of the fastest rising impacts of climate change. But the National Disaster Management Act do not recognize heat waves as a notified disaster. So think of this. The custodian ministry of the law, legal framework, do not even recognize heat wave as a notified disaster. They have not notified heat wave as a disaster. That means people who are suffering from heat impacts are not entitled, they do not have any right either to the compensation or to other mechanisms. Whereas, if you are suffering from a cyclone or a flood, that is notified in the National Disaster Management Act as a disaster. So, if you are suffering from cyclone or a flood, you have a right. You can ask the government that this is in National Disaster Management Act. Like if a person dies, minimum specified amount is 4 lakh rupees. Minimum. But if you die of heat impact, you have no right. The government can do a charity based on that condition, can give 1 lakh, can give 5 lakh, depending on that government, depending on who is deciding how much noise you can make, but you do not have a right. And the most important thing is, unlike like in Delhi you might know, because of the very high air pollution, there is a graded response action plan, graph. As soon as the air pollution, air quality index goes above 300, stage 1 is automatically activated. No ministry, no minister, no bureaucrat need to sanction that. It's automatic. If it goes beyond 400, step 2 is automatically initiated. Why is there no such thing for heat impacts? When your own ministries, own scientific bodies and the international body is saying this is the fastest rising impact in the entire peninsular India and the Gangetic Basin, where both heat and humidity, temperature and humidity are rising fast. So this is a major area. We have done some work with the state governments in some cases. Some state governments have declared heat wave as a notified disaster within their state. But nationally it is not. Many states have not done that. So I'll change over to next because I'd like to quickly conclude and then open up for the other 2-3 major areas. And I will not again, as I'm saying, I will not talk much about the international scenario and others because that's another whole area. The second, as I said, all the reports, all the studies are showing, the second fastest rising impact is intense rainfall, flooding. If you have noticed, over the last several years, in the rain shadow areas of Western Ghat mountains, towns like Solapur, Kolhapur, Satara, Karad, Miraj, these are all in the rain shadow of the Western Ghat. In the eastern side of Western Ghat, so the monsoon wind, they come and get hit, they hit the Western Ghats and the western side gets much rain, eastern side used to get very little rain. Like in Himalayas also, the Ladakh is in the rain shadow area. Spiti, Lahul Spiti you have heard about. Lahul is in the rain area. Now Spiti is in the rain shadow area, beyond the main Himalayan range. But over the last 5 to 7 years, the rain shadow area towns and cities are getting massive rainfalls. In fact, on 3 different years in the last 7 years, many of these towns got flooded. You can understand in Hyderabad situation, but for Kolhapur or Solapur or Satara or Karad, in there, and I have talked to people who are 70 years old, they said in our entire life, we have never seen rainfall like this. We used to have little bit of rainfall, drizzles.
Has the wind direction changed or
No.
intensity changed?
No.
Intensity is
Actually, because of the heating of the westernmost part and the trans-Himalayan plains, Tibetan plateau, the monsoon front is being drawn stronger. You might have heard about the 2013 Uttarakhand disaster, which is generally talked about as Kedarnath. It's not Kedarnath disaster only. 4 districts of Uttarakhand were devastated. And me and my wife, we started working in Uttarkashi district immediately after that. Massive scale, and till date, that is recorded in our recorded history, the biggest climatic disaster in the Indian subcontinent, in South Asia. Because tsunami was not climate driven. It was tectonic, geological. So the biggest climate driven disaster was the 2013 disaster. And in that, anybody can say, tell me that how long does it take on the monsoon front for going from Uttar Pradesh, which is central India, north central India, to Rajasthan, Jaisalmer. Forget about Pakistan. That's Jaisalmer is our area. How long does it take normally?
2 weeks.
1 month, almost 1 month. 3.5 weeks. In 2013, the monsoon front traveled from UP to Jaisalmer in 2.5 days. And the reason was the same. Monsoon front, because of the overheating of westernmost Indian subcontinent areas and trans-Himalayan areas, it was drawn for. Exactly same thing happened this year. And that's why there was 10 times more rainfall in August in Ladakh than the record, than the average. And this is, for many decades, this is the first year entire Ladakh and Tibetan plateau were covered by monsoon cloud. And people were quite surprised. They have not seen, they had little bit of precipitation in the monsoon season. But entire sky of Ladakh, of Tibet, being covered with monsoon. Actually, I reached Ladakh on the 8th of September. And I was also quite surprised. From 8 to 11, I could not see the sky. It was dense monsoon cloud. It is completely unlike Ladakh, completely unlike Tibetan plateau. So, and after many decades, nobody has clear record after how many years or decades this has happened. So, these kind of extremely fast changes are happening.
To flooding in Ladakh?
Yes, there are massive landslides in Ladakh also.
And water bodies would have developed also in Ladakh.
Ladakh has, because of the soil, is very porous. So it happens, landslide happens more, flooding happens much less, because the water quickly percolates. But because the soil has very low adhesion, the entire landscape slides down. And that's what happened in Himachal. That's what happened in Uttarakhand. So this is what is happening in very large scale. I'll not talk too much about Ladakh and all, but I just gave example of the kind of rapid changes that are happening. The second, as I said, the first category of very fast rising impact in these areas, peninsular India. We are focusing more on this now. As I said, is heat index. Very fast rising, both the temperature and the humidity. And this will keep on increasing as per all known science for the next 60-70 years at least. At least. So, I don't know how, those who might be younger people, how they plan to respond to that, because this will, the numbers and the intensities both will be increasing. As we see, they are also increasing. So one is that. Second, as I said, the intense amount of rainfall and flooding and landslides. That's the third. But let me quickly come to two others which are impacting already a lot of poor informal sector workers, because workers not only work in places, they also live somewhere. See, when your rainfall, in urban rainfall, urban flooding increases, where do the water run to? The lowest part of the city or the town. And who lives by the channels, canals, drains? It's not me or you. It's the poorest people, whom we often call city makers, but they have to live there. Like very recently in your case, Musi, both sides of Musi. Of course, today we saw there are a lot of middle class colonies also, but very large numbers are poorer people. May not be absolutely poor, but the poorest sections of people. So if intense rainfall and flooding increases, and along with that, we have the maldevelopment of closing of the drainage channels. How many cities have you seen who have done drainage mapping based on 100 years maximum rainfall? It is a rule. When you plan a city, you have to plan the drainage capacity for a 100-year maximum rainfall event. And don't forget, the traditional 100-year rainfall event is now being exceeded. So the next 100-year maximum rainfall event, and it has been shown. How many of you have or remember the recent Pakistan floods? Pakistan has only essentially one river, Indus. All other 5 rivers go into that. And major parts of Pakistan were underwater for over 2 months. And Pakistan's entire food production happens along the Indus. If you look at
Punjab as well.
Punjab as well. This year look at Punjab. Have you ever seen Punjab, entire Punjab, 22 districts going underwater? This is a combination of extreme heavy rainfall and massive mismanagement of dams. Because the Himalayas were getting extreme heavy rainfall for several days. So the dam management, the Bakrabias management board, the Satluj management boards, they knew the rainfall is coming. But because most of these are also connected with electricity production, they didn't release well in advance. They should have released water for 7 days in a controlled manner. There would still be some flooding in Punjab, but Punjab would not have been devastated like it has been done. But when the surge of water came, they opened the gates altogether, and Punjab got submerged. If you have seen these pictures, the Pakistani Punjab and Indian Punjab, the high barred dwellers, they were underwater. Just the top was showing. So that's the kind of, I'm not saying that entire thing is just because of climate change. Climate change impacts are playing a major role. Along with that, without taking that into account, we are going merry with our mismanagement, with our complete disregard of what is happening on the ground, and we are going ahead as if nothing has changed, nothing will change. So this is causing a major part, and I don't know how many of you remember, that probably is no longer in Telangana. 2009-10, Sri Sailam Reservoir,
Yeah, Karnool
got flooded by Tungabhadra.
Yeah.
I crossed it twice just before that. I was going to the Bellam caves with Sagar Garu and was coming back. When I saw that on September 22 or 23 of 2009, I think, I was surprised. I said, why have they kept this full? The monsoon is not over. Monsoon has retreated beyond Sri Sailam. I don't know why they kept full, because it is the electrical power station. And when I was coming back, the drizzle started. And within 2 days we got the news, the Karnool got devastated. Sri Sailam was full. When the water came, there was a backlash. The backwater went and hit Karnool. Only the downstream area was saved because Nagarjun Sagar was empty. Less than half full. So that absorbed a huge amount of water. If Nagarjun Sagar was also kept full to maximize electricity, then it would have massive impact even downstream of Nagarjun Sagar. And that's exactly what happened in Kerala in 2018. 60% of the Kerala 2018 damage was done by electricity producing hydroelectric dams. It will not come afterwards, or you have to throw it out. So massive impact not only on your health, not only on your domestic and other commitment, because you are now coming out in the evening more and more, but also on the money you have invested. And these are all it sounds very simple, but these are all impacts of the fast rising humidity and temperature. These two are very clearly impacting this. The third and fourth I will quickly talk, I will not explain in detail and then stop. The two other impacts that I have seen in urban areas, in the peninsular Indian areas, also in Delhi. One is, along with forest fires, which have increased dramatically over India, urban slum fires have also increased. At least in North India, we are seeing that very clearly. Urban slum fires. And the reason is, as I said earlier, as the intensification of rainfall has increased, it is happening less and less number of days, but more intense. So the intervening period is drier and warmer. And you know, most slums, they store a lot of very inflammable material, plastics. What are plastics? Petroleum. So they store a lot of inflammable material. And if you have a warm and dry period, the chances of accidental fires go up dramatically. And we have seen that happening in many urban slum areas. And the fourth impact that we have seen is because the wet and humid period also is happening during late summer to late monsoon. The chances of multiple diseases by bacteria, virus, fungus, all of these have increased in those areas. Because the amount of water is there, stagnating water, it's warmer temperature. Like in Delhi, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Delhi.
Water-related disease.
Yes, and I came to Delhi 33 years ago. And anybody who has seen Delhi, at that point of time, Delhi's summers used to be hot and dry. Uniformly, hot and dry. Very few days where humidity will rise beyond 30%. In this summer and last summer, we had very few days when the humidity went below 60%. So, think of this, areas where temperatures generally go high, if you also have a higher humidity persisting for a long period, so the bacterial, fungal, all kind of viral diseases, it's an ideal condition for them to increase. And where do you get these humid, warm conditions, not enough drainage? It's again the same poorer housing areas, their residential areas.
Unplanned areas.
Unplanned, so-called unauthorized colonies, slums, by the drains. This is something which is increasing very fast along with urban slum fires. But just let me finish by giving this example. 5 or 6 years ago, I think 2018, before COVID, there was a big meeting organized on multiple issues, like not only on climate impact on informal sector workers, their tenure rights, their rights for but government services, all this. So I was invited to present on the climate impact on urban informal sector workers. And the group that was noting down is a government of Delhi body called DUSIP, Delhi Urban Shelter Improvement Board. And they said, their chairman and a senior IS officer, he said, we have 23, at that point of time, 23 lakh people under our jurisdiction, which is informal settlements, they call it unauthorized colonies, something like 1100 such colonies are there in Delhi at that point of time. So 23 lakh people at that point of time. And when I presented all this, that person was really looked stunned. He said, we have never thought about this. There is nothing in our plan to do anything about this. But the good point was, he at least instructed his director and deputy director, please note down, take this PPT, do something. But this was the preparation stage. All of these are known to be increasing. All of these are there in your own government studies. All of these are there in international scientific literature. All of these projections have been done. And you have not done any preparation to save the most vulnerable people. There are plans for infrastructure protection, etc., etc. But there are no plans, I'll just finish this. There are no plans to protect people. Afterwards, there are some, but in between also, some heat action plans here, there, in cities, in states. Like Telangana has a state heat and climate action plan kind of thing. It's an amalgamation. But if you look at it, a large part of that is post-disaster response, calling, doing something as sort of rescue and relief. It is needed, but we do not prepare people or the planning for facing this. Thank you. Any question?